everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about compensation. So welcome. We are here to discuss strategic compensation planning for 2026. We have got Rochelle with us today. So we are going to be very excited to kind of talk with her and get her sense of experience and knowledge about compensation. So today is going to be an exciting topic, and you have an opportunity to ask as many questions as you would like. We have a Q&A box where you can enter any of your questions. They will be private, so other attendees won't be able to see those questions. So that way, gives you ultimate privacy to ask your most burning compensation planning questions. So I'm Lauren Winans. Thank you for joining us. I'm the CEO and Principal HR Consultant of Next Level Benefits HR Consulting. I'm a former corporate HR professional, and fortunately, I have been working with my team now for about 6 years to provide interim and fractional support to HR teams and small businesses. Rochelle Schwint is with us today. She's our Client Relationship Director and Lead Consultant here at Next Level Benefits HR Consulting. She is also a former corporate HR professional, as was everyone on our team, and she has special expertise in compensation, OD, learning and development, all things general HR BP. She is a jack of all trades for sure, but compensation has always been near and dear to her heart, and that is the reason that we're here today. Before I hand things off to her, just to give you a little bit more information about Next Level Benefits, we are a leading boutique HR consulting firm. As I mentioned, we support HR teams and small to medium-sized businesses with any sort of interim or fractional HR needs that they may have. Our entire team is experienced HR professionals with decades of experience. So we really pride ourselves on jumping in quickly, helping you to handle your most daunting tasks, customizing our approach, and jumping back out to be the bench strength for your team, kind of waiting in the wings when you need us. And with that, I will hand it over to Rochelle to kind of go over today's objective and kind of review some of the things we're going to talk about today.
Thanks, Lauren. Hi, everyone. As she said, my name is Rochelle, and I'm going to walk you through the process of getting ready for next year's budget and compensation processes. So what we're going to talk about today is and we're going to provide to you those tools that you need to build a pay strategy. Our wins have to be attraction and retention of good employees. I have some interesting data to share with you, and we're going to explore how to leverage market data and best practices to design a compensation strategy that attracts, retains, and motivates your top talent. We'll also discuss aligning your pay philosophy with your organizational goals and budget cycles. This is a packed agenda. We're going to talk about all of those things. I'm not going to read all the bullets to you, but some, just kind of off the cuff effective strategies include, but are not limited to, offering base salaries is just that starting point. To truly inspire and motivate your best employees, you need to think creatively about performance-based rewards and growth opportunities. And the latest foray into that, skills-based hiring, all of those things. Some effective strategies include bonus and commission plans, equity-based compensation, restricted stock units, all of these things that you guys have been working with for years. What we're trying to do today is to give you that succinct plan for putting all of those things together, offering tailored benefits and perks that cater to your high-performing employees' specific needs and priorities. And that goal at the end of this is to create a total rewards package that not only attracts top talent, but also incentivizes them to stay and continually excel in their roles. Well, I think we all know why compensation planning matters, but here's a few things that can help you in those conversations that you might need to have with your leadership team on why we're starting now for 2026. We're going to dive deeper into the specific benefits of effective compensation planning. We are going to help you align your compensation strategy with your budget and ensure that your organization is poised to both recruit the best candidates and keep your most valuable team members. The challenge is twofold. We need to win in that talent market by making competitive offers, and we also need to retain the high performance that we already have. Winning new hires requires speed and transparency. Having those tools in place gives your talent acquisition team that speed and the transparency that they have to communicate with candidates without having to continually go back and forth and ask, am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to offer that? Retention requires fairness, equity, and career progression. Those are key points that not only once you get somebody in the door, but what are you going to do with them once they get there? By focusing on both winning new talent and retaining your high-performing employees, you create a strong, sustainable workforce that aligns with your overall philosophy. We'll explore how data-informed decisions, benchmarking, pay equity analysis, performance-based metrics can help you achieve this goal. First step, data. It's always the data. Data matters. Data helps you have those conversations with your leadership team and your CFO about why you need certain things. So we're going to start with benchmarking. I know sometimes it's hard to justify salary surveys, but they're important, and they give you the concrete data to support grade increases and salary structure redesigns. By benchmarking the compensation and benefits against industry peers, we can ensure our offerings remain competitive and attractive to both new and existing talent. Pay equity analysis is essential. You have to address any gender or demographic-based disparities in compensation. It strengthens your employer brand and aligns your values with fairness and inclusion. Finally, the use of performance-based metrics allows you to link pay progression directly to an employee's skills, experience, and contribution to the organization. So again, we kind of bleed in with this skills-based hiring. Not every role requires a college degree or a four-year college degree. There are lots of degree and certification programs out there that add value in the workplace. Taking the time to really look at what is required for a job will make all the difference in the world, because you can then take those criteria and push those into your performance evaluation system and actually grade or quantify your employee performance based on the job aspects that they are supposed to be using on a day-to-day basis. And help you define that performance level with your high performers, and ensure that managers have the tools that they need to adequately evaluate employee performance on quantitative measures, not qualitative measures. And we won't get into bias on performance evaluations, but this is definitely a factor that helps you give those data points rather than recency bias and halo bias and all of those things that we already know about.
Sorry, guys, it's on me. Gotta launch this poll. Hang on one second. All right, our poll question here, how do we link pay to skills, experience, and performance? So if you wouldn't mind giving us your answer, and we'll hold here for a handful of seconds. And then when we end the poll, I'll publish the results so you can get a sense of if you were correct. A few more seconds here, because still got some responses coming in. Okay. I'll share these results here. Rochelle, what do we think about these results?
So definitely what I expected, the majority of people chose all of the above. There is no wrong answer. The point for this is just to give everybody those thinking points and talking points about why the whys. Why would you do a compensation philosophy? We're going to get into building a compensation philosophy in a couple minutes, but this is that precursor to it as to explaining the why, and then gathering people that you may or may not have ever put together in a room to define what your compensation philosophy is going to entail. Thank you, everybody, for participating.
Thank you.
So some other items that, encourage this and feed into the data-driven aspects is market benchmarking, aligning pay to external data while factoring skills and tenure, skill-based pay models that's rewarding employees as they gain new job-relevant competencies, differentiated performance incentives, providing bonuses or merit increases tied to results, experience-based tiers, setting salary ranges or levels that progress with years of expertise. Now, I'll give a little caveat before I go to the last point there, is that, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, but we're going to talk about relevant experience just briefly versus, the years that someone has actually been in the workforce, for instance. They may or may not apply to what they're currently doing. One of the things that a lot of people neglect is accounting for work history that was related, but maybe it's a few years old and it's not the job they're currently doing for you, but they did that at another employer a few years ago. So all of those things count when you're talking about promotions and the transfers and, even just applying for a completely different job in the organization. It may seem completely out of sync with what they're currently doing, but they could have that employment history from another employer. So, and then there's hybrid models blending skills, experience, performance metrics into a single pay framework. And we do have an example of that, a very brief one, but just to kind of give you an idea of how you can structure a salary schedule that takes all of those things into account. So the first thing that you want to do is review the data. What is your current status, your current compensation philosophy, if you have one that's documented? A lot of places don't. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's a good place to start. What is the philosophy? How do you want to do business? How do you want to communicate compensation? How do you want to handle things like red circled employees and green circled employees and people who switch jobs, transfer, change locations, move from one geo salary schedule to another geo salary schedule? We'll talk a little bit about those more as well. You also want to align with the budget, performance, and promotion cycles. And a lot of times those are not easy to do because it seems like when you put everything on the calendar that we are responsible for aligning with, because we also have to consider open enrollment is coming up. But we're talking about 2026 budgets already. You also have to talk about promotion budgets and getting people in the right places, in the right location, in the right job, and doing the things that you need to do to get to the next level as a company and what you're producing. And then you want to also have a defined communication plan for how you intend to communicate not only your compensation philosophy, but also be transparent in how you manage certain things like start pay versus promotion pay versus shift differentials. All of those things should be defined so that if a talent acquisition professional comes to you and says, they want $2,000 a year more than what was targeted, there should be an answer for that gives them some guidelines to work with. And whether that guideline is they have a plus or minus of X amount of dollars, or they have a signature authority up to certain dollar amount, or they have a certain percentage they can go into the salary schedule without having to get another signature. That empowers your employees to do the best that they can, not only for the company, but also for the candidate. Happy candidates hopefully make happy employees. Okay, here's where we get into the meat. Developing a strategic compensation philosophy. We already talked about reviewing the goals, but we're going to get a little bit more into that. You want to ask a lot of questions. This is a process that you want to go through, and the process is built out in the handout, the downloadable handout that we're going to send you after this session. But I'm going to go over them briefly so that you can, but you don't have to take notes because you're going to get it. So the first thing you want to do is define the purpose. What is the purpose of your compensation philosophy, and how does it align with your mission, values, and business objectives? So an example statement. At whatever company, our compensation philosophy exists to attract, retain, and motivate a diverse workforce that advances our mission of fostering innovation, customer satisfaction, and sustainable growth. That's an example statement. Yours does not have to say that. There's plenty of examples out there, but you first want to know, like, what's your problem statement, or what you want to solve. Then you're going to have to look at compliance. You're going to have to evaluate, and this is where you're starting to gather research. You want to gather the appropriate market benchmarks. You want to validate that your current policies are in or potentially out of compliance. We have things that are changing all the time with executive orders and legislation and things like that. So it is something that has to be managed consistently and quite often, unfortunately. You want to make sure that you're, for example, that you are in line with your minimum wage requirements that not only could be specific to your county, could be specific to your state. It could be specific to, oh, I have municipal contracts and I'm required to match their minimum wage. Or it could be Service Contract Act or Defense Based Act, DBA. Those are all the things that play into the gathering the research. Are you ready for pay transparency? Just because your state might not do it now, like for instance, I happen to be on the East Coast, and there are states that do and states that don't. But I've also worked for companies that had locations in Washington State and California and Colorado, and they all have pay transparency rules. You need to define what it is that you're sharing, because I have not seen yet any of those laws that actually define what pay range posted on your job posting consists of. So whatever you do, you should have a philosophy about it. Do you only advertise the starting pay? Do you have a disclaimer statement that says it could be different in different states? All of those things, you want to define what that is, and that's part of your compensation philosophy. You also want to make sure that you are in compliance and that you're watching to see if your state or municipality is looking at adding that pay transparency. I think there's currently about 15 states that have pay transparency. And then also you want to make sure that you account for bias, discrimination, potential, all of those things that keep you out of trouble. So you could say something like, we commit to adhering to all wage and hour laws, conducting annual audits, and providing leadership and compliance training. That's an example statement. You also want to make sure that you have looked at equity and fairness. Your methodology for conducting audits should be documented. How often? Who performs them? What's the criteria? And then performance and skills alignment. This is where you get into, like we've moved into the empathy map of thinking about what does that mean for us? It's understand your user needs, pains, and motivations. Brainstorming. This is where you pull people in, perhaps from areas where you don't normally have those conversations with the people. Could be somebody from the hourly ranks. It could be somebody from engineering. Choose your committee, for lack of a better term, with the thought in mind that you would like a cross section of people, even if they're not necessarily HR folks, but you can pull in other HR folks that don't normally have anything to do with compensation, to come up with a compensation philosophy that answers some of the questions that people may have had over the years. As an example, one of the instigators to a project that I did at a former employer to create career guides for the different skill sets was that on their employee engagement survey, they had a resounding number of responses that said, I don't know what my next step is here. So we created career guides that showed that there are levels that some people didn't know existed because every level is not always advertised. And everyone does not automatically move into an inline promotion either. We also documented some non-traditional movement. So all of those things kind of play into that brainstorming with a lens. What is your purpose? That's your lens. When you start to get into number 6, the affinity piece of it, that's where you organize your thoughts into themes. What are those areas that have been pain points? What can you solve by just documenting it, saying it, providing a guideline, training the managers? All of those things play into what can you do to figure out what your next step is. And then sketch the next journey, visualize that customer journey for how an employee is going to perceive the information that you're providing, that you're communicating, that you're putting out on your company intranet, that you're putting in notifications. Look at it by user experience, UX. That's a lot of times relegated to software development, but user experience is a good process to go through when you are implementing any kind of huge change as a change management part of the toolbox that you would have. And then when you get to a point where you have something that you are ready to work with, then you present it and get buy-in from leadership. And then you start work. Review and adjust based on the feedback that you get. You can do small feedback groups and make adjustments. Start with that process now before you get to a point where you actually are dealing with the whole budget. Understand where you're going before you start digging into, we've had several people in the welding department that claim that their friends are making more money at a different employer and they do the exact same thing. Have all that data ready to justify or provide that data to their manager that explains why you are paying a certain range for a certain job. So to that end, we have a sample pay matrix where we are talking about incorporating skills, experience, and performance. So this is a secondary piece of the market data. This helps you define your levels within a particular skill set. Not saying that you need to have 4 levels. I've seen as many as 6 levels. I've seen from basically associate to a senior principal. I will say that 6 is a lot to manage and maintain, and it takes this same bucket of money and chunks down the levels to where your movement between those levels doesn't seem like much of an increase. That's kind of the feedback that we got from it. So reserve levels 4, 5, and 6 for maybe certain roles. These are not hard and fast rules. They're generalized. I think that most people would consider like a level 3, someone who can do the job and possibly even unofficially lead team members, more junior team members that have come on board, and keep them on task without requiring them to do timesheets or really be a supervisor. It's more of a team effort, but you're utilizing your more experienced employees. And then when you get into advanced and expert, when you're looking at ratios of how many like senior level or principal level roles that you have, there's no hard and fast rules for that either. But you don't want to be super top heavy unless, for instance, you're research and development and that's all of your people are senior, and that's totally acceptable too. That's why we can't give you something that's super prescribed. We can give you the guidelines, but you need to customize it to your way of doing business, but also the work that your employees do. So, best practices for winning and retaining talent. Transparent salary ranges. Again, this goes into defining your whole compensation philosophy. Your compensation philosophy is not just that overarching guiding statement, like the example that I gave. It's the whole shebang. It is documenting when and how you get overtime. It is documenting shift pay, geographic salary schedules. Do you have to make available to every employee every grade range? No, but I think that there's enough information out there that unless you do share it, you will get more questions about why you do things certain ways and why can't I know. And we all know that you can't keep employees from talking about their pay. So giving them enough information to where they understand why they're at a certain level, what they need to do to get to the next level. That's part of your career laddering plan. But also what other things are available to them. It helps with having those important conversations with employees and managers about what an employee's next step could and should be. So documenting those career paths, creating documentation. Typically, it's by skill set. They can vary by business unit, but for the most part, the skills that are required in one role, and I'll just use engineering as an example. That's an easy one for me because I've worked many organizations that have engineering. I think we all know there's about 100 ways you can call an engineer, or 100 different specialties. But there's, depending upon who you ask, 5 to 7 major specialties in engineering. You're talking mechanical, electrical, construction, biomedical, computer engineering, and chemical engineering. That's 6. That's pretty good off the top of my head. Industrial and manufacturing is that up and coming 7th one. So that being said, and process engineering goes with industrial and manufacturing. That being said, there's a lot of offshoots of those main specialties. You could have avionics engineering under electrical or computer engineering. Sometimes they're a mix of the two. It depends on what the industry is that you're in. And you may have different levels within those roles, and they may have different pay ranges, because it's just pretty consistent that chemical engineers typically make higher schedules or higher pay than mechanical engineers. But you can also choose to not do that and pay all engineers in the same ranges. Depends on how big your organization is a lot of times as to whether that seems like a method that you should take. But also understand that a manufacturing engineer can also work as a mechanical engineer. And if your manufacturing engineers make consistently less than your mechanical engineers, you will lose your manufacturing engineers to another department to be a mechanical engineer, because they went to the same school, they took the same classes, they have the same core classes. So you're just going to have unnecessary movement between roles when all they're looking for is to be paid, in their mind, equitably with their other engineering folks that they took a lot of the same classes. So that being said, you should look at where your compensation changes and for what reasons, and what exceptions can you have. Have exception policies so that you don't write a policy for every contingency, but that you write it for the majority. And then you have a caveat that says, here's your wiggle room, so that managers know what they can, and that includes your HR managers as well as your hiring managers, know where they can get an exception and where they can't. If there is no exception available, then, don't list any. So flexibility and scalability, adjust based on changing business needs and growth stages. You could be in an upward growth mode that is organic. You have got a new contract and you're going to have to hire 100 new people. That's organic growth. Can you scale what you're doing in compensation for brand new business? Can you scale it for an expansion of existing business? Most people can probably say yes to the second one, maybe not so much for the new one. If you document your processes enough, then new business won't be any harder to gather what you need for market data than it is for existing business. New geographic locations. What's your philosophy on geographic locations? Is it a hard and fast? I don't know, like I've worked places where Florida was the baseline and Washington State made 20% more, and Huntsville, Alabama, specifically Huntsville, not all of Alabama, made 10% more than Florida. But that started to get closer and closer together as people kept transferring between locations, chasing the dollar. So bear that in mind. What's your rule? If someone takes a role in a lower paying geo area, how do you handle that? Because there's going to be people that will fight for what they feel like they still deserve. And there are some people who are just going to, okay, I applied for a job, it's in a different state, that's on me. But you need to make sure that people are treated equitably and fairly, because you also have to take into account that if you have a whole bunch of people, for instance, from California or Washington, decide they wanted to move to Florida because the housing is cheaper here. It's not anymore, it used to be. And you don't reduce their pay or make some sort of adjustment, they are then going to drive up all the Florida salaries in their same skill set. And I say this because it's happened and it wasn't fun. And then you want to make sure that you're aligned with the business values. What is your core business? What are the hard to fill roles? And again, make sure that you define where the wiggle room is in your exceptions, and don't rule by exception. Give those exceptions as real exceptions. Some of the information that I've been reading recently is the American workforce has made dramatic shift from job hopping to job hugging. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but that just really gave me a little giggle. It was coined by Korn Ferry. They are a very reputable firm, and they coined it as, it describes workers clinging to their current positions rather than seeking new opportunities elsewhere. So we went through several years of people continually moving to new roles, whether they were making significant strides in pay or not. Some people would call that generational. I'm not so sure that it's generational. I will say that while there are trends that are generational, it doesn't fit everybody. So you can't make huge assumptions for that. But it reflects a broader economic reality that has made job hunting significantly more challenging, and might make it harder for you to attract, the new talent that you're looking for. Also, Eagle Hill Consulting's Employee Retention Index found that employees most likely to stay in their current roles over the next 6 months include Gen Z workers and men. Now, I have opinions about Gen Z. I birthed one. And I can 100% guarantee you that him and his long-term girlfriend absolutely fall into that Gen Z, not willing to move, even though neither one of them are particularly happy at their current role. Meanwhile, the voluntary quit rate had remained steady around 2%, according to the US Department of Labor. So a couple little factoids for you that kind of support the job hugging as being somewhat generational. It's not 100% guarantee.
All right. Well, Rochelle already mentioned that you will be receiving the session recording. So before we start our Q&A, I just wanted to remind you that the compensation philosophy builder that Rochelle mentioned previously, you will have access to download that. We will be sending you an email in the next couple of days here with access to that session recording, as well as the link to the download. And our compensation philosophy builder is very much aligned to the chart that Rochelle went through, that was like a journey with the 8 different steps. And so that will be just a nice worksheet to kind of help you either reframe your existing philosophy or create one if you don't have one today. So thank you, Rochelle, so much for this, wealth of information. I may have advanced the slides too quickly, so if there's anything that you might want to share with us during this Q&A, feel free. But we did have a few questions. I'm just going to pull those up here. Let's start with this first one here. What are the most reliable sources for benchmarking compensation today, and how often should companies refresh that data? It's a really good question.
Yeah, and I think we both can respond to this one. I'll start with that should be part of your philosophy, but it's one of those things that has a lot of caveats. It could depend on your industry. How often do they do salary surveys? I've seen salary surveys that are done every 5 years because the dial doesn't move very much. And then I've seen them change every year. So if you have a particular skill set that you struggle with ensuring that you are offering the best salary that you can, given your budget constraints and your business philosophy and the work that you guys produce, it may be that you do it more often, no more than once a year though. And it really should be a huge exception that, and I have experienced this in the last couple of years even, that when a new skill set becomes popular, like for instance, virtual reality and augmented reality, when that first became popular, using it in engineering, okay, it's been for sure in the gaming arena. When it became popular to use it in engineering and manufacturing to avoid rework, the example that I can give very quickly is putting on the VR glasses and walking through a 3D, and I mean walking through life-size engineering model of a capsule, and the engineers realizing that, oh, the technician will never be able to reach this screw to change a light bulb. Bad example, but to change a light bulb, they'll never be able to reach it because there's actually a panel in front of it. But if we move the panel 3 inches to the left, then we don't have to punch a new hole in the metal. And that is a real example from a rocket company. And that being said, they really worked very hard on the augmented reality portion of it, but it was new. They immediately wanted to require a 4-year degree. Well, guess what? those 4-year degrees at universities didn't exist. So we had to do a lot of research, we had to adjust, and we had to say, okay, we're going to temporarily make this a very advantageous salary grade, knowing that it's a little bit outside of our normal hourly roles, no degree required, no engineering required. Then when you look at, okay, well, what do we do next year? Do we keep increasing their grade or their job profile at the same rate that we increase everybody else's? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you slow down their growth as things start to settle out and certifications become available, which they are now. There's still only a very few degree programs, and they're usually at private institutions rather than your college universities, although they are starting to create those certification programs at the universities, which will grow into bachelor's degrees. Now, where can you get the most reliable sources? Again, a lot of it depends on the skill set in the industry. There are ones that focus on engineering. There are ones that focus on medical. There are ones that focus on finance. There are ones that are generic. It's always good to have at least two if you have to limit yourself. If you have one that's like high tech, where your IT and your engineering and that are covered under that and their managers, and then one that's generic that handles the rest of your kind of administrative staff, that would be like the bare minimum. There's lots of services available out there. You want to look at how many respondents they have, not only in total, but also they'll tell you how many respondents they have in particular skill sets. If you only have one respondent, that may or may not be a valid, and it does happen for oddball jobs, that there may only be one respondent that actually provides their salary. I don't know what anybody thinks about salary.com anymore. Do you have any comments on that? It used to be hard pass, not accepting any employee who walked into my office and said, salary.com says I should be making X. But, interesting question. If anybody has any comments on that, you can throw them in the chat about whether you've seen that decrease or whether you think salary.com has become more reliable.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed it's become a little more reliable, but it is still, it's hard because there are people who might want to put their own job in the search field, and they don't actually know what they're looking at, or they don't know exactly what what the data truly means. I think that's what is difficult when you are having to address with an employee, information that they found on their own, and what, the information, the true benchmark data that you have, and the sampling is a much more reliable sampling than maybe what they're gathering online, which actually leads me to another question that we have here. And so how much pay transparency is realistic? And how should organizations communicate pay ranges to employees? You touched on it a little bit, but I think this is definitely a hot topic as more pay transparency laws roll out and more companies embrace transparency.
So I'll go back to pay transparency is not well defined. And a lot of times it's not defined at all. It just, legislatures pass regulations that they think are helpful. But because that's not their expertise, they are making a statement that doesn't have any criteria or research behind it about what actually constitutes pay that you should be advertising. I think we all can agree that a lot of candidates will look at a pay range and they will think when it's posted that, well, I'm going to try for the max. But if that's the max of your whole grade, we all know that that's not feasible, and it doesn't make any sense. Comp philosophy that a lot of companies go by is their hiring range is the first quartile. They may give their recruiters up to midpoint without needing to get, based on their own judgment, years of experience, relevant experience, and all of those things. You give them a matrix that says, here's how you make that decision. You give them where they can go to, or a percentage above the starting range, so that they're not coming to you every week. I have an employee who wants, a little bit more, or a sign-on bonus, and we don't do sign-on bonuses for this role, etc. So that being said, going over midpoint for a role will really throw your internal equity off. So understanding and having talent acquisition understand what they're communicating to candidates, and also employees who are applying to other internal roles. If you get your internal equity off, you will have way more churn and burn with internal candidates that didn't need to be there if they don't understand why a particular role makes more than the current role than they're in. Maybe it's a level, maybe it's a skill set, maybe it's a hard to fill role right now. So the more transparent you can be internally, and the more transparent you can be with your staff, the better the communication will flow without the angst from the employees who feel like they're not getting what they need to make an informed decision about whether they should apply to a role or a different location or a different department. You shouldn't have people, and I think everybody knows this, you shouldn't have managers posting the exact same role in different departments that have 180 different degree or experience requirements. I have seen postings where in one posting for the exact same role, they have asked for a master's degree and 15 years of experience, and another posting for the same role where they're asking for the minimum. So you have to ask yourself, well, if a candidate is really out of sync with what you're proposing that the pay should be, what your pay grade has been assigned, then you have to ask yourself a couple questions. One, is your market data current, and does it feel right with your budgets and what your expectations are and what you know from your other similarly situated HR folks and compensation folks? If the candidate is out of whack and their expectations are misaligned, then having your talent acquisition folks be informed enough to ask questions about, well, why do you think you should get the max? Some people will say, just because it's available, so I'm going to ask for it. Some people will say, well, I was making that at my old job. Okay, well, tell me about your old job. Maybe they aren't apples to apples. Maybe the expectations aren't the same. So the more transparent you can be, the more you will have people walking in the door feeling like they got the best offer that they could have gotten, whether it's internal or external.
That's great. All right, let's see. This is a good one. What trends are emerging in incentive structures? For example, like variable pay, bonuses, long-term incentives, etc., for non-executive employees. Any trends you see that are emerging, or are we still kind of, pretty status quo in some of these areas?
So as far as non-executive roles, I have seen more individual contributor roles be advertised with performance bonuses on top of your merit. There's been some complicated math behind some of those. Again, being transparent is always better. Because if you put in an offer, you're eligible for a 10%, performance bonus. Well, what does that mean? What do you have to do to get there? So that's probably the biggest trend I've seen, is more individual contributor roles on the professional side. Typically, will have some sort of bonus structure. If that is, well, the company has to make their goal first, and if it's deemed that by the board that you've met 75% of your company goals, okay, well, then you're down to 75% of that 10%. And then they also add a factor of your performance evaluation score. So then that has another impact on the bonus. That should all be well understood and communicated. The hourly or non-exempt roles, I see more in the realm of shift differentials and I guess what you might call uplifts for doing work that is either a shift that is considered not favorable, like split shifts or midnights, whatever the case may be. And you can stack multiple uplifts on top of a salary. It's always good to keep those separate and apart from your base wage, because once you start adding things into your base wage, then everything gets compounded on top of it exponentially, and it's an expense that may or may not be anticipated. It increases your 401k contribution costs when you start adding things into a base salary. So whatever system that you have, even if it takes multiple lines to reflect someone's pay, it's always better to be as transparent about that as well. The other piece that flows into about being transparent about base wages versus uplifts and bonuses is that when people change roles, if you've rolled in your lead pay, for instance, that was something that I have had to unwind at a place when I walked in, and nobody could tell me really who was a lead and who wasn't, because they didn't have a separate line and they didn't have a separate job profile for lead. So we went back as far as we could go to figure out who had gotten lead pay and when, pulled it back out of their pay, added it as a separate line item so that their merit and their 401k and everything is calculated on their base rate. Not only that, but if they decide they don't want to be a lead anymore, it's a lot easier to just remove one line that's $1 an hour than it is to take apart their pay at that point, because at that point, they're married to it. They're not going to let it go, and they're going to protest.
All right, here's a loaded question for you. What role will technology, AI, and analytics play in compensation planning over the next 3 to 5 years?
So I think it's going to play a big role. There's a lot of movement in AI in general, but also AI in talent acquisition, AI in talent management. So we're talking performance evaluations and disciplinary actions and all of this. So having AI as a tool to polish where you're at or polish your proposal, using it as a tool, I think is going to have a very positive impact. Asking AI to create something from scratch could backfire. Plus, you have to be careful about what you're actually putting in your prompts, because everything that you enter into your prompts becomes part of this hive mind of ChatGPT that can cause someone else to get, or you later, to get a false answer, because they are putting all of that out there. And there have been cases where ChatGPT has just made stuff up. There have been cases where ChatGPT has referenced something that another person entered into their ChatGPT about themselves that actually wasn't true. There are 2 radio hosts actually talked about that. They actually did a little experiment, and the female jockey, she put in some information about herself and then asked ChatGPT to, like, I don't know, create her a bio or something based on this information. And her partner in crime on the show then searched for her, and some of that information came up in his search. So just bear that in mind, that it's only as good as the information that is put into it. And I think we all can agree that the World Wide Web is full of so many things that are untrue, outdated, and there is no control over how far back ChatGPT will get something and whether it's actually valid, whether it's still valid and current, or whether it was ever valid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of scary, isn't it?
And we shouldn't rely on AI to do all the work when we're talking about identifying candidates either. Because you also have to understand that ChatGPT takes the bias of all the information that it's scraping from the internet. So you could introduce unintentional bias to your processes by relying too heavily on AI.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's just do one more question here and then we'll close things out. So in a couple of minutes or less, can you tell us what's one action HR leaders can take this quarter to strengthen their 2026 compensation planning?
I got four for you. Four high-level steps. Review the data. So that means gather the data, review the data, analyze the data. Okay, so we'll just say that's a high level. The second one is define or refresh, if you have one, your compensation philosophy. Full stop, you should have something. Start simple. Doesn't have to be super complicated. Doesn't have to be super elaborate. Sometimes less is more. Align with your budget cycles. Ensure that you not only, if you don't have an annual calendar, that is something, even if it's in a Word calendar or an Excel spreadsheet, just creating that calendar that tells you when you need to start things. Not necessarily always. I mean, you need due dates for sure, but you need back into that. Historically, how long has it taken you to prepare for open enrollment? How long is it, when does finance require the first presentation of budgets? Okay, so does it have to get signed off by the VP prior to that? Okay, you got to back up 2 weeks. You have to back into these dates and then create a communication plan and make that information available, whether it is on your company's intranet site, in regular communications. And if you don't have an intranet site, they should be stored in a folder that is accessible, so that if somebody asks a question about something that they saw, 5 months ago, that someone on your staff can find it. So communicate clearly and consistently with the understanding of who your audience is, being cognizant of how the information that you're presenting might be perceived.
Great
So 4
answer.
things.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. We really, really appreciate all the information you shared with us today. To close things out, if you are looking to get some professional development credits for attending today's session, we have both the SHRM and the HRCI codes right here. We'll also make sure that you receive those via email upon completion of this session. And our contact info is here. So if you'd like to check out our website, nlbenefits.com, we've got some great information out there, including a video hub, many templates to download, including the compensation philosophy builder will eventually be up there, but you will get first access to it. We'll be sending that to you in an email along with the session recording over the next few days. If you would ever like to reach out to us to talk about project opportunities or to ask questions about this webinar, feel free to reach out to info@nlbenefits.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube. We share a lot of great content, and we hope that you enjoyed today's session. Thanks again, Rochelle, for spending time with us and for sharing all of this information that is incredibly helpful as we gear up for 2026.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.